Give me a second. I'm just going to tweet this out so people know I'm going live. Let some more people come in here. What's good, everybody? How's your Sunday going? I'm going to do another short live. I'm out and about right now here in Austin. And you guys have been following me. You know, I've been reading up on critical race theory because it's important that we understand it, that we know what it is. I mean, especially for those who oppose it, we should know what we're opposing. Happy Sunday, Arnold. How you doing? Up in Endgame is up and down in Boston right now. Good to see you. But here's the thing. I mean, I'm studying critical race theory. I got a book called Critical Race Theory, an introduction. It's basically a primer on critical race theory, what it is. It talks about its origins and some of the ideas that have been rooted in critical race theory, which has been around since the 70s. I'll be doing a video at some point going deeper into what critical race theory is and all that stuff. And what I'm expecting to find is that I'm sure there will be some elements of it that I agree with. But like with other leftist theories, it tends to be used in a way that is more divisive than productive. So I wanted to give you just a little snippet of what I've been reading, and just a note and inconsistency here that I think you guys might spot when I read it. So I'm going to read a passage from the book. Again, this book is called Critical Race Theory. Author is Richard Delgado and one other whose name I can't remember. But I'll put a link to it, and I'll also put a screenshot of the passage that I'm reading from right now on this thread on Twitter. But I think it's pretty interesting. But I'll just go ahead and read it. Now, before I read this passage, it uses a term called crit, as in being a crit. A crit is somebody who is a proponent of critical race theory. That's all it means. So I just wanted to make sure I define that so you would know what they're talking about when I read this passage. But the first part of it says, but if racism is embedded in our thought processes and social structures, yeah, let me start over, actually. I think I might want to... No, that's okay. I'll just read this passage. Okay, real quick. Quote, but if racism is embedded in our thought processes and social structures as deeply as many crits believe, then the ordinary business of society, the routines, practices, and institutions that we rely on to do the world's work, will keep minorities in subordinate positions. Now, there's already a lot in that passage, but I don't want to focus too much on that part. It's the next part that I really want to focus on. But it is interesting that they are insisting that racism is, quote, embedded in our thought processes and social structures. And they believe that it's embedded very, very deeply, far more deeply than I would probably agree with. Now, you know, I don't disagree with the notion that there is racism or racist outcomes in a lot of our institutions and systems. I do not believe that the entire country is racist, and I don't think that racism is deeply embedded in everybody's thought processes. But I'll discuss that on another thing. Here's here's a proposition or a potential solution that these people would put forward. So here it is, quote, only aggressive, color-conscious efforts to change the way things are will do much to ameliorate misery. As an example of one such strategy, one critical race scholar proposed that society, quote, look to the bottom in judging new laws. If they would not relieve the distress of the poorest group, or worse, if they compound it, we should reject them. So what they're saying is that if somebody puts forth a piece of legislation designed to fix a problem or to address a situation going on, then we shouldn't bother passing that law if it doesn't relieve the problems experienced by the poorest groups in America. we should also reject it if it would compound the problems that poor people have in America. Now, on the surface, that sounds good. However, people who are proponents of critical race theory tend to be on the progressive left, right? For the most part. And they don't exactly live by this. And I doubt that the person who put this forward would would agree, would actually follow this rule when it comes to certain laws. Can anybody think of some laws that disproportionately impact the poorest among us, especially minorities, that the left supports? I can think of two just off the top of my head. The first, gun control, right? So if you are a proponent of stricter gun control measures, then you are proposing a measure that would disproportionately make minorities less safe. The same goes for defunding the police. These measures disproportionately make it more difficult for low-income minorities to defend themselves against criminals who obtain their weapons illegally, right? So if you've got a black person living in a high crime area, let's say it's Chicago, just because that's what we always talk about, right? And also Chicago has strict gun control laws. That person will have a harder time obtaining a firearm to defend himself and his family than a criminal would getting it illegally, which, by the way, is why a lot of black people do get guns illegally, not because they want to murder people, but for self-defense. That's something that Maj Toure talks about a lot. That's actually one of the reasons why he started Black Guns Matter. So that right there is an example of a proposition that will make black people, black and Latinos, less safe if they happen to live in a area that has a high crime rate, has a high poverty rate. They can't depend on the police to protect them. In some cases they can, but in others they're there to arrest people, which also can lead to saving lives, right? I mean, if somebody commits murder and they're allowed to roam free, they'll likely commit murder again. So I'm not dismissing that at all. But at the same time, it's much harder. This makes it harder for more black people to be safe, which they should be calling a racist outcome, right? But they don't see it that way. They think that by making it harder to obtain weapons legally, they're somehow protecting people, and they're really not. Another example is when it comes to education. These people will say we should have measures that don't make it harder, that don't make life harder for people in low-income areas, which happen to be mostly minorities. And yet they will vigorously oppose charter schools. They will vigorously oppose the notion of school choice. Now, if you haven't watched it already, check out my interview with Laney McAllister on my YouTube channel. I interviewed him just a couple of weeks ago because he is the CEO of the, I hope I don't butcher the name, but it's the Pennsylvania Coalition of Charter Schools. And he gets a lot of pushback from a lot of white liberals and black liberals too, but mostly white progressives. He gets a lot of pushback from, guess who? The teachers' unions when it comes to using charter schools. They argue, we'll just fix the public schools and we won't need charter schools, which is a load of crap. But he's not necessarily, he doesn't dismiss the idea of fixing public schools, but that's going to take a long time to fix the problems in public schools in low-income areas. So while that's happening, why don't we give parents a choice to get their kids into schools that will set them up for success and deal with the problems facing public schools? They don't want to do that because they don't want that solution. But again, if they're going to try to remove something, and removing this would make life harder for low-income individuals, then they're not following their own ideology. You know, one thing that Saul Alinsky said is force your opponent to live up to their own standards. That's what I'm doing right now. They don't live up to their own standards. And I'm not saying that every single person who supports critical race theory agrees with this particular solution in this book. They did say it was one critical race theorist. At the same time, we know that the majority of them, at least in general, would support such a proposition. If I ask the average liberal if we should pass laws that could make life harder for low-income people, or pass laws that don't specifically help low-income people, they're going to agree with that. They're going to say, yeah, we should try to pass laws that help low-income people, and we should not pass laws that make life harder for low-income minorities. But when I point to these examples, guess what they're going to say? They're going to fall apart, right? Because a lot of these people don't believe what they say. I'm not going to say all, because there might be some who might see the disparity there. They might not agree on the gun control thing, but they might agree on school choice. As a matter of fact, the majority of Black Americans want school choice. So when white progressives dismiss this or outright object to it, they are engaging in at least a form of racism. I don't know what you call that. Again, same with defund the police. Most Black people don't want to defund the police in a way that would result in fewer officers in their neighborhoods, but you have white progressives and their Black allies pushing for that, knowing that it will never affect them. It will only affect the Black people that they claim to be trying to protect, right? So this is a way that critical race theory can be used in a way that is more destructive. I mean, and I think a lot of conservatives might agree with the idea, don't pass a law specifically that's going to make it hard on low-income people. I mean, there might be some scenario where that makes sense, but in general, we don't want to do that, right? This is an example of that. And again, if we're going to push back against critical race theory, we need to know about this stuff so that we know what areas to point out. Instead of just saying, oh, a critical race theory just says that everybody's racist. No, that's very reductive. That's not a good representation of what critical race theory is. And I'm already learning that just in the first couple chapters here that I'm reading. Now, it's not like I didn't know that before, because I know how right-wing media works, but if we're going to push back against this thing effectively, we need to know what it is, we need to understand its tenets, and then we need to come up with a messaging strategy that shows how it's being used in a way that is destructive. We don't have to throw all of it out, because like I said, I'm sure that when I'm already reading stuff, and I'm like, okay, I agree with that. That makes sense. Okay, take the good, discard the bad, call out those who are trying to exploit it for a political agenda that actually has nothing to do with helping minorities or defeating racism, and offer something else. I've been saying this, I've been harping on this, and I'm going to keep repeating it. Offer a different idea, offer a different theory, offer a different set of ideas and theories that can address racial disparities, that can address poverty, that can address crime, instead of just putting our heads in the sand and pretending like there's no problems. We don't have to agree. Again, we don't have to agree with how progressives shape the conversation in order to acknowledge that there are problems with racial disparities and differences in treatment between minorities and whites. It's okay to acknowledge that. It doesn't make you a race baiter, but it means that we do need to come with actual solutions. We need to be the adults in the room and show how we can fix these things without demonizing people, because the heart left wants to solve it by demonizing people. They want the division. Again, I'm not talking about everybody, but again, we need to push back against that. We can't do that effectively if we don't know what critical race theory is. And I posted that poll on Twitter last night. I said, how many of the people, and I'm talking specifically about influencers, how many of them who are pushing it back against critical race theory have actually read about it and have actually picked up a book and learned about it? Like, somebody suggested that I read Mark Levin's book that mentions critical race theory, and I get that. If you want to read that, fine. I have no problem with it. I'm not gonna read that, at least not right now, because I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth first. I want to hear what they say critical race theory is. I want to know how it was outlined originally. I don't want to read it through the filter of an influencer who I know has an agenda, even though I might agree with his agenda. So if these people made up the theory, I want to hear their explanation for what it is, and I want to see how the left is using it, and then form my opinion based on that, not on what another influencer says. Now, if you guys know of a conservative commentator who was talking about critical race theory in a way that's fair, let me know. I'll read that. But I'd rather give an honest accounting of what this is, because again, You can't defeat something that you don't know about. It's like I think it was Sun Tzu. Like, you can't defeat an enemy without knowing your enemy, right? Or without knowing your opposition. You got to know what they're actually saying, and not what people are telling you they're saying. Because the thing is, if we do that, we will make arguments based on things that they're not saying. We'll be arguing against stuff that they're not saying, and that's going to make us look stupid because they're going to slam us for it. And they should, because when they mischaracterize our arguments, we slam them for it. So just wanted to share that little snippet with you. Let me know what you think in the comments or on Twitter. But I just wanted to share that little bit, and I'll be sharing more snippets as well. And again, I'll be doing more of a series on what critical race theory is and the best ways to oppose it. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Please share this video. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. And if you have, just share it. I really appreciate it. And I will see you on Twitter. Keep your minds free.